Hi, folks. This is Luke Covey with Crucial Tech, and today we're talking to Ian Thornton Trump about something that's been bugging me for about a week now. Some of you may not know that I hold dual citizenship in both the United States and the United Kingdom, so I'm concerned about both of those countries. And in the past week, there have been riots going on in the UK, targeting specifically Muslims and people with skin lighter than most English people. And basically, it's over the killing of three little girls and the injuries of multiple other children and adults by an imbalanced young man. And somebody started passing around
Yep.
misinformation about who this kid was, mostly done by white supremacists, and that's giving them the excuse to attack people. And I wanted to talk to Ian about this because it seems really suspicious to me that this is happening now, right after the UK had a regime change. And
Oh,
Ian,
right.
I'm wondering if there isn't some foreign nationals involved in this. And the reason I'm really concerned is that the United States has got an election coming up in November. And the
Yep.
way things are looking right now, it's not going well for the conservatives.
Ew.
So I think I'm afraid we're going to be facing the same thing in the United States that we're facing in the UK, and it's going to be much worse.
It'll be interesting to see how that plays out, Lou. I think first of all, there's a vast difference between the military and law enforcement capability of the United States and the ability to incarcerate mass amounts of people very quickly. The UK takes a different approach to policing. As you can imagine, armed police officers are a rarity. Um, However, they do have significant anti-riot capabilities, which they've deployed, but it took them time to ramp up. But the UK, due to the ubiquitous use of CCTV camera, will be arresting people for the next year, Lou. So
Okay. They've already got 400 of them.
yeah, there's no doubt in my mind that all of the riotous behavior, including for the first time arrests for social media postings, which opens up a whole new and very interesting and quite disturbing chapter in civil liberties um, within the United Kingdom. But let's contextualize this first. You're absolutely right. There was a regime change from a conservative government that was, I would say, conservative enough to hold radical forces at bay.
Okay.
Um, Now, what was interesting is during the course of the election, we had a fringe candidacy of what we would call far more right wing. That was Nigel Farage
Right.
and his Reform Party, of which certain members of the Reform Party said very inflammatory, very racist rhetoric, and were not exactly, I would say, shut down. So there was this undercore of migrant folks, as you said, folks with darker skin, that are perceived to be a leeching away at the very Britishness of society. This is to say that, they take the opposing view that diversity doesn't make our society stronger, and that somehow these migrants are taking jobs and using benefits at the same time, which is a bit questionable.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but there is a big difference between illegal migration and, I would say, legal migration in the United Kingdom. And unfortunately, you can't really tell who's who. So the far right wing has been reacting to this new paradigm because they've sort of not been placated by the sudden and abrupt turn to a bit of a labor and leftist leaning society. And as a result, this is a powder keg situation that unfortunately has grown out of control by stoking on social media. Now, getting to the crucial of the matter, is the social media being driven by a external party? Absolutely, 100%. Now, here's why. This is standard textbook operations to take a divisive issue and amplify it with the use of bots. And that is precisely what we're seeing on the X platform, basically because Elon Musk has now a preference for far right content, as does the algorithms apparently on Instagram that promote far right content more favorably. And I'd imagine the same is for Facebook as well. Obviously, we have another problem. The media is fed on violence and outrageous behaviors and outrageous statements here in the United Kingdom. And unfortunately, it's difficult for the media companies to responsibly report something when each media company is trying to out sensationalize the other. And obviously, there's been injuries, there's now been arrests. There has been a tremendous amount of violence. Some people escaping with, the very backs on their clothes as their buildings are burned. And interestingly enough, it's so unguided that also a Buddhist temples have been targeted, as well as the Sikhs as well, all with the concept, of course, that they're brown, so they must be Muslim. So we're in a summer of major discontent in the United Kingdom. It was not made any better. In fact, some people have been likening the 1970s to the current situation, where the Labour government had to readily admit that they don't really have a solution to what the Conservatives have left them with to work with in terms of the fiscal situation. So
Yeah.
that fiscal situation can also be weaponized by external forces, stoking the fires of depression, of a possible large recession, which was, of course, not helped by the recent stock movement in the United States, and questions around a global recession resulting from a recession in the fastest growing economy. And not to mention, I think, which is part of the standard playbook of any nation state, is to continually exacerbate the distance between the rich and the poor. That's a time-honored tradition going back to Roman times.
Well, crap, because you know it sounds like it's a horrible thing, but it's like they don't really need to do anybody. It don't need to convince anybody of anything.
No, and in fact, it's just amplifying the outrageous sort of positions of the fear of others, and xenophobic to the extreme, and it will break down into contests of trying to out British each other, um, and that will be kind of interesting, because the patriotism that's being exhibited is completely misplaced. British society no longer is an empire. It is no longer out to conquest the world and subjugate. That has been made painfully apparent as we revisit the treatment of LGBT plus people, not to mention the entire Windrush generation, and of course the deplorable blood scandals and other scandals that we've had, such as the post office, that tended to victimize immigrants more than the actual kind of white citizens of the United Kingdom. And I guess in some respects, folks are being amplified in their distaste because they feel that somehow these migrants, who have literally come to the country with nothing on their back, right? Basically, small boat, at risk to their lives the whole journey, have paid the criminal element to smuggle them into a country, and they have literally arrived with nothing. Now, I'm not totally saying open the doors and let anyone that wants to come in. What I am saying is having a defined path to citizenship for migrants, and a defined path to citizenship for illegals, and whether or not that's returning to the country of origin or not, the questions remain on how to handle these particular situations. We're in a very similar situation to the United States in that there are jobs in our society that white people don't want to do,
Yeah.
quite simply, bluntly. And there are plenty of people that the situation that they are fleeing, all right, is far more dire, and they will take literally any job to get them the hell out of whatever terrible place they are. And we seem to fail to understand that level of desperation because we seem to be completely, I think, what do I say? The word I'm looking for is really kind of content with where things are right now. And I feel that basically, when you inventory the United States, when you look at the raw amount of opportunity, and this goes for the United Kingdom and Canada and New Zealand and other countries around the world, there are far more opportunities there than there are in Africa right now, or the Middle East, which is on the brink of war. So are you surprised then people will do anything they can to come here? And are you surprised that the nation state actors have a stick that they can stir the pot with really easily?
Yeah. And that's the reality of it. Now I want to know is what can we do about it? I mean, in my case, I don't use Facebook anymore. I maintain an Instagram uh, uh, account simply for friends and family. I got kicked off of X a couple of years ago
Yeah.
because I wasn't very complimentary to Elon, and still are not. Um, I'm on LinkedIn quite a bit, and I'm really enjoying Mastodon because I have greater control over it.
Yep.
But what do I tell people that just can't seem to break their addiction to X and Facebook? How
Yeah.
do we get past that? Because if that's where people are amplifying this stuff, we need to learn how to ignore this somehow.
Well, remember back, and I hate to say that we're going to have to look at how we're approaching freedom of speech issues and social media. So let's go back to the war on terror. Sad time for America and truly the Five Eyes countries, including the 27 Canadians that were killed in 9/11. And we made it very clear that you could be arrested for posting and supporting a terrorist organization, material support for terrorists
Mhm.
was a charge, USC code 18 and something something under the Patriot Act. We, I think, going to have to use similar types of anti-terrorism legislation to deal with the far right. And that includes the full spectrum. Take away the money, take away the liberty, take away the ability to like and share any terroristic content, whether it's domestic or abroad. If the shoe was on the other foot and you had a group of Muslims that was going around burning and looting places right now, I'm suggesting that law enforcement would have all the tools at their disposal they need to shut it down. It doesn't matter what the color of your skin is. If you're doing violence to other people or or the lives that they have built, you're equally as guilty and you should be dealt with as a domestic terrorist. And once the domestic terrorism apple, I guess, is in the cart, that now compels the social media um, companies to take this seriously or face the sanctions. And the sanctions could include charging the social media organizations with material support to terrorism if they continue to use algorithms to promote this content. I think what we're finding, Lou, and it's kind of about time we had this conversation. There are limits to free speech. And when that free speech leads to inflammatory behavior and amplifies dissonance within our society, not dialogue, and perpetuates violence, then the social media companies, have to bear some of the responsibility. Now, I'm not going so far as to jail folks, the vice president of Meta or something like that. But let's go back to what happened in the wake of the Volkswagen crisis, where quite literally senior executives were held to account for the violations of the malware that faked the California emissions test. They
Mhm.
went to jail, Lou.
Did they?
So maybe
Yeah,
we need to look at that.
yeah. My background is one of my earliest mentors was Dwight Bentel, who was the founder of the School of Journalism at San Jose State, and he was an advisor to the Supreme Court of the United States on freedom of speech and press law.
Yeah,
So I had a pretty good education in this. And there is a Supreme Court precedent, Sullivan versus Times, which came out and said you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, especially when
that's
there is no fire.
right.
That is a hard and fast limit. Now we've got a couple of justices who want to get rid of that, but there are responsibilities with any freedom that we have,
I agree.
and what we seem to keep forgetting is that you may want to have the freedom to say whatever you want, and you can go ahead and say whatever you want. But there's nothing in the Constitution forbidding the government or anyone else from exacting consequences from that speech. And on a very small level, we're starting to experience that in the United States with our presidential election, when the new vice presidential candidate a few weeks ago, before he was a vice presidential candidate, went on Fox News and came out and said Donald Trump and his followers are weird. Okay, now that seems to be a real nothing insult for people, especially when they're used to being called racist and fascists.
Yeah, seems
Which,
like a pretty downgrade, almost a compliment.
but that is driving them absolutely up the wall.
Yeah,
And Democrats actually finally learned this, and they've known this for a long time. We had that book back in the '60s, talking to teach people how to do radical uh, demonstrations, and one of them was to use ridicule against your opponents because you can't argue against it.
no,
Now, that's one consequence of free speech, and you can't start calling people that you're canceled on every platform that you have access to when people are calling you names. You're
yeah.
going to have to get used to it. But at the same time, there are laws against inciting riots. And I
Well,
think
there's law against defamatory speech. There's law against perpetuating a false message. There's law against, slander. We have all these laws. It's whether or not the court system and the police and the government, is in the United States Constitution a right to social media? No.
no,
Social media can be taken away from you, Lou.
but
Like,
we do have the FCC rules, Section 230, that gives social media companies the protection under the Telecommunications Act.
maybe
Uh,
it's time to revisit that.
well,
Like,
that's the thing, is that the argument has been is that all we are is a conduit of information,
yeah,
which is all the that's all your telephone is. That's but the thing is, when you're talking about things like television, there are laws. There are truth in advertising laws. There's obscenity laws that control that. But the problem is that the social media companies like TikTok, like Facebook, like Google are all starting to say, we are valuable sources of news. And they're starting to use AI to write content.
yeah,
That's not the process of how having one person send their ideas and thoughts over the network to someone else or to a multiple number of people, that is in itself the act of mass communications. They have made themselves to be publishers. And yeah, I said this in an article a couple of months ago, that when the CEO of TikTok went before Congress and said, we are an important source of news, well then, brother, you're not covered by Section 230 anymore.
Right, right.
And now you have to follow the same ethics and laws that news organizations have to follow. And maybe we need to start, we had a thing called uh, the fairness doctrine,
Mhm.
which it's expired under Reagan, that said, if you're going to present one side in a mass communication media, you have to give the other side the same amount of time and opportunity.
Right.
And that made television really boring because no one wanted to give that opportunity anymore. But maybe it's time to bring that back. Maybe it's
Well,
time to hold people responsible for their speech.
yeah. Like, it's interesting because in the UK, if I send a bunch of harassing text to somebody, I can get done for basically the equivalent of digital harassment,
Yeah.
quite simply. If I don't direct it at someone and I just spout it off, it appears that you can do so without consequences. Now, there is a viral video that went out where the police apparently were inside somebody's residence. So let's just put where the video starts being a bit problematic. But they're essentially arresting this gentleman for his comments on Facebook. They didn't, they were going to arrest him and take him down to the station, okay, for an interrogation. It works a little bit differently. But the question remains is, how did those officers end up in his house without a warrant? Okay? Because normally, if the police come to your door, they either have to be in hot pursuit or articulate a reasonable and probable suspicion. I think they were acting without, judicial oversight at that particular point in time. So we'll see how this all shakes out. But if true, and if they can effect an arrest and follow it up by an interrogation and lay charges, of communicating for the purposes of hate or inciting racial disharmony or antisocial behavior, which is the catch-all in the United Kingdom, which covers any sort of behavior that isn't social. I truly wonder, we're crossing that line, and some civil libertarians have said that that's thought police, but we've had that for a long time. Just say that you'd like to go and join ISIS and you'll be done. You don't have to go there and prove that you're now part of ISIS to get arrested. So we've had that thought police. But if you say you're going to, burn down a mosque or a church or what have you, that's a threat to property. That's uttering threats at minimum. And it might be prudent to charge you based the way defamation and slander works for the number of views and shares that that particular post got, because that's going to be equal to the number of charges that you're going to receive. So that, like the same thing is with the number of publications of a defamatory statement is actually the number of charges. The other, of course, mechanism is that once this person has been identified, a giant civil lawsuit, something very similar to what the United States used very recently of robbing someone of their constitutional right. So there was this dude who published a bunch of text saying that you could vote by text on your phone, and he targeted Democrats in New York. Well, the New York state charged him. He tried to plead that he was just being comedic. The judge didn't buy it, and he got sentenced for it. So, these are the type of things where it has to be taken seriously, because if there's no consequences to this violence or to this property damage, then, nothing will change and it will get worse. So the government, unfortunately, is now going to have to drop the hammer and put the necessary resources in place in order to send a strong message that this behavior is unacceptable and putting other people's lives at risk is completely abhorrent. And I think they do have the mechanisms to do it. And like I said, Scotland Yard is the equivalent of an elephant, and it never forgets, and it probably has it on tape.
Yeah. Well, let's see if we can wrap this up in some practical ways. The first thing
Yep.
I'd like to say is one of the reasons I got off of Facebook is I spent more time on Facebook answering questions from people about stuff they'd seen on it and
Yeah.
asking, is this true? Yeah. And 9 times out of 10, I said, no, it wasn't, but it was too much of a time suck. So when it comes to social media, if you're one of those people that get your news from social media, here's my first suggestion. Don't. If you see something and you think it's so outrageous that you can't believe it's true, that's the way it is. It isn't true. If it's on Facebook, if it's on X, if it's on Instagram, TikTok, just assume it's not true. And I don't care if it's political or medical or social or any other subject. Whatever you see on social media, 9 times out of 10 is a lie.
I agree with that. And I think there are some telltale signs of content too, where, one of the things is this person is not followed by any of your followers. That means it's going to be outside. If it's a first name and a keyboard smash of numbers, again, suspect. If you start seeing the same content being sent out by other accounts that are like a first name and a smash of numbers, these are other telltale signs. And also, a lot of the algorithms that are out there are just going to push stuff into your timeline because it appears to be popular. And that's how the bots work, right? They try to make something like and share it rapidly so it gets into as many feeds as possible. And it's hoping for you to like and share it. But I think most social media users now that aren't, I'm going to say, a very a very controversial alignment, if you will. So not ultra right wing, but not ultra left wing. I feel like the majority of those people and the majority of their inner circle of friends are the good test. And clearly, Lou, that's why people reach out to you. They see stuff on Facebook or X or other platforms in your past, and they ask you, is this actually a thing, and we saw this. And I think actually one of the neat things about the CrowdStrike event was social media conspiracy theories around it, which there were, got crushed pretty quickly. And this was because there was, I'm going to say our cybersecurity community, as polarized as it can be on some issues, when it comes to tech, they're a pretty good barometer of bullshit. And we know for certain there are some people in our community that's all that comes out of their mouths. So, I thought the whole conspiracy theories about, the CrowdStrike thing being a cyber attack and et cetera, we go back to those lovely intellectual razors, don't don't believe.
Don't attribute to malice what can be better explained by incompetence.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. And then the most likely explanation is the one that is the simplest.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. So when we start thinking about thinking, I think that's really the key when it comes to dealing with social media. And, again, something that is coming from the New York Times, Washington Post, even more of the fringy type of publications like the Atlantic or something like that, that might be more aligned to, a Democrat agenda. All of these things have some intrinsic value in painting a picture of what's going on. If you have a single source for all your news, I think that's the first pit trap that you're falling into.
Yeah.
Like, seek out other opinions, Google the topic. And I know now that when I teach a lot of people about online scams and stuff like that, take whatever is happening to you and add the words in Google, is this a scam? And it might tell you, it might put you in touch with other people that have been victimized by the same type of thing,
Yeah,
you know?
I find that to be a pretty good way of doing it. So, okay, so don't listen to social media and use your brains. And maybe we can get through this. And hopefully we're not going to have in the United States what we're seeing in the UK. And hopefully the UK government can finally get a handle on this. Ian, thank you for this time. I'm really depressed. I'm going to start drinking early.
All right, well, cheers to you.